Welcome to a new episode of the Asylum podcast for Total Croatia News. I'm Borna. With me today is Vladimir Bogdanić, a game developer. We will be talking about games, game developing in Croatia specifically. As you can see, we are not in a studio or office. We are out far away from the computer, so they will not hear what we're talking about today. So, welcome to our podcast, Vladan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so before we go and start talking about what you do specifically, what your company does, what kind of game are you have in store for us, let's talk a little bit about gaming and gaming industry. I think a lot of people listening, probably, of course, almost everybody knows what games are, but they don't know actually what game developing right now is in the world. So can you explain a little bit?
It's definitely sort of a multidisciplinary thing. So to make a game, you need to have a studio of programmers, you need artists, you need audio engineers, you need storytellers, some script writers, and really important, you need a game designer. So it's one of those things which kind of combines multiple art forms. It combines things that we've known from the past and makes them interactive. So I would say it's definitely something that's, a lot of people are aware of it, obviously, but it's definitely something that requires kind of a synergy of multiple industries, I would say.
But it's a growing industry, so people don't.
Yeah. In terms of how big it is, obviously it's a lot bigger than the movie industry. I'm not sure. I don't know the exact numbers, but
I think I was looking into it, and I think it's around $140 billion per year.
Yeah, that
this year
sounds about right. Yeah,
and worldwide, I think box office for movies is around 40 billion. So it's like a 100 billion difference, which is amazing. I think the mobile games are now, even just mobile games are a bigger industry now than the movie industry. I don't think people are talking about it like that in Croatia, right?
Yeah, I think in Croatia in particular, the situation is simply that a lot of people don't really view this as, I wouldn't say legitimate industry, but definitely are not aware of the fact of how big it is, and just not aware of the fact that people actually earn a living out of doing these things and working in this industry. Another thing is I think there's still not quite a lot of, there's a lot of local developers here in Croatia, but I think in kind of the general mindset is not that it's a thing that actually happens around here and sort of in this region. I think one of the reasons behind that is because in order to create a fully fledged game as a product, you need to have a certain budget, and let's say that because of our whole economic situation and everything, it was, and it still is, kind of difficult to get to the point where you can actually finish a full game yourself with a team of, let's say, 5 to 10 people.
Okay, but so it's not a cheap investment.
No, so it definitely isn't. Okay, it depends on the scope of your game, obviously. Like, you can make a game yourself, completely from start to finish. It's going to be very small in scope. It's probably going to be really hard, and maybe you're going to spend like 5 to 10 years working on it. But yeah, it's doable.
Can you give me an example? Is there a known game that was done by a small team or a person that became a huge success?
In Croatia, not so much, but there's an example from maybe I think it was last year. There's a game called Stardew Valley, which was basically made by just one person, and it sold millions of copies or something. It was a huge success. But it's an example
Digital
of
oil. Digital oil.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a good example of how far the technology has come, in a sense where it's empowering a lot of people, whereas maybe 5 or 10 years before, you needed to have, let's say, 15 people to create something. Now it's, because of how far we've come, you can actually make one yourself from start to finish.
Okay, but you mentioned this. Is there prejudice? If we're talking about industry that is so huge right now, and if I'm not mistaken, Grand Theft Auto, the game, is the biggest.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest
entertainment product ever made. It's $800 million in first 24 hours. The first $1 billion product in 2 days, something like that. So that's amazing, but why? What do you think there's prejudice? You think still it's considered that video games are for children, they're something for children?
I wouldn't say that there's prejudice from just the general population, but I do think that the people in power, let's put it that way, don't really view this as a viable industry yet. It is changing, and actually just a couple of weeks ago it was announced that we were getting I'm not sure what it was. It was a change of legislature where they're basically now allowing video game companies to ask for funding from the same pool of money for movies.
So culture-based.
So culture-based, yeah, culture-based investment. It's one of the first steps, I would say, to getting recognized in that sense. I think another problem is that in order to become like a stable company, let's say that you want to try and start up a local studio, you have 5 friends and you want to do this legit full time, it takes you a huge amount of time to get to the point where you can actually get some of the money back in. And so I think that also doesn't help in the perception that this is actually something that can make money. Because if you factor in like how long it takes you to start developing a game, how long it takes you to get to the prototype stage, to finish the whole project and release it, you could be looking at about 3 or 4 years before you can even get some of the money that you invested back in. So not just become profitable, just to get back some of the funds that were already invested. It takes quite a bit of time.
Okay, give me an example. You have a studio, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what's the name of the studio?
Yeah, so the name of the studio is Zero Life, and we've been working on 2 games actually. So one of the games that we've been working on is called Light and Dark. We started working on it in 2015, and I think the biggest challenge was getting funding. So we didn't work on it full time. We worked on it like 2 days a week, just for a couple of hours, just to kind of try and keep the ball rolling, I guess. And what happened was we got funding. It was a very long process.
Funding from where?
From international investors. So it was a UK-based company that approached us, that it does investments in the video game industry.
Is it a common thing for smaller developing studios to get investments from foreign countries?
Not in Croatia, but in the UK, Germany, and other places in Europe, it's fairly common. Like it's standard stuff, and you can, if you have a solid project, if you kind of know your numbers, if you know how to pitch and everything, all you have to do pretty much is produce a prototype that's good enough so that people can figure out what your game is about, and then get to a point where you can pitch it to publishers, so or potential investors. So I think if you're anywhere in Europe, I think it's a lot easier than if you're in Croatia. But it's also because of the fact that you can get much more money outside of Croatia. Like if I go to any like local investment scheme here and ask for a typical budget, I think most people would consider that to be a lot of money. Whereas in the UK, it's standard stuff. It's kind of.
Is it outside? I mean, I guess in the United States it is the idea of free market completely. But in EU, I mean, if in Croatia the Ministry of Culture is now thinking about investing in such a thing, that means in Europe it's much more connected to the national. It's also industry and
it's also connected to tax write-offs. So for example, in the UK in particular, I don't know the exact details, but basically you can choose if you want to pay taxes to the government, or if you want to invest in a creative project that's going to help some small startup create a project.
So there's an incentive for.
So there's an incentive for investing in small businesses, basically. Yeah.
Okay, so that helps a lot, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a very stable long-term strategy because, like, I think in Croatia, like, people would, they simply pocket the money and buy a car or whatever. Whereas, if you can invest in potentially solid projects, you can get your money back several times.
Do you think it's going to be different? Because for smaller countries, usually the biggest problem is if you have a product and then you have your own market, and usually if you're creating something that is not all culture things, but it's something you use as a Croatian language, you have a problem with the amount with the size of the market. But for games it's different. Almost all games that are developed are kind of international. They're trying to be in English. They're not trying to be specific. I mean, I cannot even imagine what would be a Croatian game only for Croatians. What would even that be?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think the primary reason is you can push kind of your culture. You can try and market your own unique spin on whatever it is that you want to do. So let's say that you want to have a game about some event in Croatia, or it can be something historical or whatever. But at the end of the day, it has to be a good game. So that's the part that's really, it's tricky to execute, but it's also crucial where if you have a really good game design, if you have something that's fun and playable and people like it, then the other element, which is on top of that, your kind of your own spin on it, your story or whatever it is you wanna translate, that can work fine. And we've seen plenty of examples of games that have a really good art style, good art direction, something that's unique, or that they showcase a specific culture. But at the end of the day, that they were successful. But at the end of the day, like, they were successful because the underlying part, the gameplay, was really solid and well executed.
Yeah, but I mean, I can imagine a lot of the stuff is cliches. You know, if you do Total War, Rome, of course it's about Italian history, Roman history. And if you do, I don't know, Smite, you're gonna have all the different gods, Nordic mythology. But is there even more specific cases? Let's say, I mean, Grand Theft Auto is obviously set in let's say the fifth one in New York.
But it's because the market is bigger, obviously, more people.
Yeah, but I mean,
States.
I'm asking because the funny thing is, when I was a kid, you always loved when somebody would create something that's connected to Croatia. I remember Soldier of Fortune came. He was placed on Kosovo. It had people, talking with in Serbian, which we understand as well, and then with the Gas Guzzlers, which is a Croatian Croatian product.
It's Gamepires. Yeah, they're actually working on. So a good example is the game that they're working on right now. I'm not sure when it's going to be released. I think it's coming fairly soon. It's called Scum, and basically it's kind of like a survival multiplayer online game where the location of it is the island of Brač.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. I saw it. It just looks exactly.
So they went there, they took a lot of photos and did a lot of magic to make it look the way it does. But again, I think the reason why that game is going to be successful, and I'm really hoping it is that because the underlying gameplay is solid and it works.
It's fun.
So it's fun, yeah. Well, I haven't played it yet, so I can't say.
So what do you think about, so let's talk a little bit about, in your experience, and what is happening in Croatia when it comes to game developing? So obviously it's a huge potential.
Yeah.
But people are not really thinking about it that much. But more and more in Croatian media, you can hear about successful companies. So can you tell me a little bit about what's the scene in Croatia right now?
Yeah. So I would say we have about 30-ish studios. There's maybe more. It really depends on how you want to classify things. You have the big ones that, like, for example, Nanobit, which makes mobile games, and Katia. But you also have, like, veterans like Crow Team who have been doing this for 25 plus years. But those companies aside, what's really happening is there's kind of a big boom in small indie studios, like 5 to 10 people who just kind of get together, try and do their own thing. I think now is a really good period to kind of get into the whole thing. I think we're seeing a really big explosion of these small studios who are releasing more and more projects. I mean, we've had 2 games were released just like today and yesterday from Croatian studios. So now it's getting more and more frequent that we actually have a solid base of studios which are constantly putting out some really good stuff. I think the problem is that obviously it's a very volatile market. So what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of studios are probably going to, some of them are going to become popular, others maybe close down, and maybe the people from there move on to other studios. We're still kind of seeing people learning the ropes of how the industry works and figuring out all of these things, because up until maybe 5 to 10 years ago, it used to be much more closed off and you had to jump through many more hoops to kind of get your game released. But partly because of services like Steam, it's kind of opened up the market to anyone to release whatever it is that they want to release. And so I think that's a really good thing, because...
And you don't have to worry about producing and packaging. You basically...
Yeah.
It's a digital sale.
Product, and you have game engines like Unity and Unreal, which really help you kind of bootstrap your game and create all of the basics very quickly.
I'm sorry, but we should maybe explain a little bit what Steam is before we continue, because I think a lot of people don't know who are not playing games.
For sure.
Steam is...
is an online digital platform where it's kind of a storefront where you can buy games. So the bar of entry is much lower because, like we said, anyone can release on it, and it's kind of democratized the whole market. Where, in a sense, like this is one of the things that I always hated as a kid was we'd have like 2 or 3 retail stores, and you wanted to go there and buy a game, and everything was so expensive, and they never had sales or anything. And then Steam came along and basically said like, no, we're gonna allow all price points, and we're gonna put things on deep discounts like 75% off and all of that stuff. And so eventually over the years you could easily buy games for like super cheap. And I think that was...
And plus you didn't have to buy them physically.
Yeah, you could just get online, enter your credit card number or PayPal or whatever it is you had, and just buy it and have it.
So you're also saving the rainforest.
Yeah.
No, really. Because I mean,
Yeah.
that was one of also the biggest problem. You would have to buy, so about a game, you maybe want to buy it online, then you have to pay for the taxes, you have to pay for the post office to bring it. But this just went away and said, no, nothing, just pure digital information. You download it, you have it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was amazing because I was a real criminal, I remember.
Yeah,
Back
same
in
with
the
me.
days,
I think
we're all downloading it illegally.
Yeah, I mean, it really goes to show you that it's something that the guys from Steam keep saying, that piracy is a service issue. It's nothing else. It's like people just want to have access to things at a affordable price, and as soon as you give them something that's more affordable and easier and convenient, then it just kind of goes away. I think I have like almost 800 games in my Steam library, and like I can't remember. We can share it, and I have my account. I can take my laptop, and everything just works. I can synchronize game saves between computers, so it's convenient, and you can like chat to your friends and everything. And so again, it solved the problem where
and more servers, if I'm not mistaken, Origin and different ones are kind of catching on. They also want to give this kind of digital library.
Steam is still probably the biggest one, but again, console manufacturers have their own storefronts. So Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, they all have their own versions of the same thing. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think for me, like the biggest change in that mindset was, I remember I went to one of the retail stores back in the day, and I noticed like Grand Theft Auto 3 was, I don't know, 300 kunas or something. And then I went online and I went on Steam and I checked, oh look, there's a huge GTA bundle with all GTA games released so far, and it was like 50 kunas or something because it was on sale. So at that point you immediately know that this is a losing game. You can't win this.
You can't win seller like this.
Yeah.
So when it comes to green lighting and stuff on Steam, so how does that happen? So how does Steam and this kind of stuff help a game developer?
So they changed it quite recently, actually. It used to be they had a green light process where you would register and you would kind of put up a video and a description of what your game was about, and then you would have to get the community of the whole platform to kind of vote for you to get past the point where you could actually release. Now it's Steam Direct, so it is what it is. You just create an account, you pay, I think it's like 90 euros or something like that, and they actually take that money and give it into charity or something. And basically once you pay that amount, you have access to the store. And as soon as you have access to the store, which is where we are now with our game actually, so you can create your own product, you fill out all the metadata, upload videos, basically tell the people what your game is about, and as soon as you do that, like, you have the option to release your game. So it's fairly straightforward. There's a one-time fee to pay for it, and that's it. With console manufacturers, it's a little bit different. It's still a longer process. You need to ask for development kits, which are basically specific hardware that you need to have, it's kind of the same, it's the console that you want to release on, but it has a few extra bells and whistles, which basically allows you to develop the game for that platform. And then again, you go through some sort of approval process. But like in our case, for example, all we did was we filled out a bunch of forms for Microsoft to get an Xbox dev kit, and like it was a bunch of emails going back and forth, like pretty standard stuff. They were just interested in like what the game is about, when do you want to release it, can you give us a trailer, some video clips, maybe some gameplay demo, and you send them that, and they basically send you a dev kit for free. So in our office we have a hardware.
They want to support it. They
want you to release on their platform. So it's similar with the other platforms. Some have a bit of a longer process to get verified and so on. But in a sense, I think the market is really opened up to anyone who wants to release. So
it seems to me like you're right. The future is looking bright. There's a lot of internationally investments, and apparently the whole system is kind of promoting itself.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Croatian game developing, what do you think are the biggest problems? You just mentioned there's there's a few well-known actually, or let's say successful Croatian developing studios. You've been talking to them, and you've been on. There's Croatian. Well, it's not a festival. How would you call it a boot? It's more of a
conference, I guess.
Right?
Yeah, there are meetups and conferences. Something is always happening, like from month to month.
So how do they deal with the fact? Are they okay?
I would honestly say that, like, I think people are trying to solve a lot of the problems right now, but in my mind, the biggest single problem we have is double taxation with the US. Like, put everything else aside, that's the biggest issue, because basically you release on Steam or any other platform, you release in the US, your game gets out there, you pay taxes there, and you get a certain amount of money into Croatia, and then you have to pay taxes again. And so
it's automatically.
Yeah. So everything else in terms of like getting investment, getting funding, I would say it's not as big of a problem as the double taxation issue, and it has to do with politics, with the U.S. and with a lot of bigger issues than we can particularly, like the video game industry can't solve this problem.
Okay, but can you give me? I mean, I know like Witcher is one of the examples, but when it's done right. This type of games can be a huge hit. It doesn't matter. Being a smaller country or a country that is not, let's say, rich as a Western country, doesn't really play a big role. So, let's say, like Witcher is a great example of how Polish game development is now kind of world known, and a lot of people are moving into Poland now to work.
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak to how many people they're hiring or what the general state there is, but. Yeah, for sure. Again, it's an example of a video game that did its mechanics right and like did everything else right, and that was unique enough, and partly because it's the story is based there and everything kind of ticks together. Another example is Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is a game by a Czech video game developer, and they also kind of did their homework when it comes to history. I think they hired like 7 or 8 historians to make sure that everything is kind of accurate. But again, like I think, we do have the benefit that we can kind of tell unique stories from our own perspective and push that out into the world. But as soon as your core ideas are fun, as soon as they work, then I think more power to you.
That makes sense, and I want to talk about that now. And that is the idea that if we're, let's say, investing in our culture, we're investing in the movies, we're investing in books, but we're kind of just start to invest in video games. Now, I think a lot of the reason why people have prejudice, or they're not even aware of the size of the game industry, game developer industry, is because they think that games are just kind of fun. Let's say they're like meaningless fun.
Yeah.
But that's not the case anymore, right? All from the scientists and medical experts all the way to the people who promote national cultures, let's say, they agree that we're talking about something much bigger. So I've been reading up about the physical responses that people are having. Younger generations who were now raised around video games. That I don't know. Some of the experts actually claim that if you play video games like 2 hours a week, it helps with your concentration, reflexes, perception, depth perception, everything, color perception.
Yeah.
So you think this is something that is also something that people in Croatia don't think about, that games are considered something. So a healthy kid is not a kid who's playing video games. That's kind of prejudice, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, if you're playing video games nonstop for like whole days or whatever, then you have a problem.
If you're playing football 12 hours a day, you're going to have a problem, probably.
Yeah. I don't know. I think one other reason is that because in maybe the last couple of years, we've gotten to the point where a lot of indie studios have started developing like really unique twists, telling you really unique stories, and then you can see the shift where it's no longer something that, in most cases it's fun, but it can also be a little bit, it also has an extra layer on top where it's trying to send a really powerful message and then, has a really unique story to tell. Like, I can give you hundreds of examples, but I think the best one that comes to mind is a game called Papers, Please, which is about being a border control officer and then stamping passports, and it's set in this dystopian Eastern European fake country. So it's things like that, which I think
on the end of every week, on the end of every day.
Every day you have to pay your bills and everything, and it's a very kind of, you're in this very ungrateful position where
you have to buy medicine.
You have to buy
Always.
medicine. You have to buy heating. You have to buy
choose
food.
between food, medicine, and
Yeah,
heat.
and
That's
the
amazing.
downside is that the way you make money to buy those things is you have to be effective at your job, and the way to be effective at your job is to detain a lot of people at the border. So it's kind of this very tough call to make. And
Okay, but that's a great example. But it's let's say it's a comedy example.
But the reason I mention it is because I think that's one of those things that I would encourage a lot more people to play. Because if they have this idea that it's just fun and games and it's silly and it's not trying to be an art form or whatever, then you need to look deeper. Because there are a lot of options, a lot of games like that. And so that's one reason why I think it's still a little bit of a disconnect in Croatia. And again, I would go probably to the whole story with budgets as well, where if you wanted to release a full product as a company, it takes a huge amount of time. So it's harder to prove to people that this is something you can make money off, and this is something that people can live off of for years, for example.
No, that's true. But let's talk, I want to stay a little bit on this idea what can games do for us.
Yeah.
Right. So in a bigger picture, people always, even now, are thinking, so it's an industry, just like music industry. Right?
Yeah.
But when we talk about music and not music industry, we think good stuff about music. Music heals, music makes you better. I mean, you're a DJ as well. You know about that. But when we talk about games, I don't think we talk enough about what we can achieve with them. So the example of Witcher, the Polish game.
Yeah.
I was at my friend's house and he was playing a little bit, and I saw that they were using glagolitic script for their script. Now, from a Croatian perspective, this is like pure cultural gold. This is what we're trying to do all the time: preserve old glagolitic script, promote it. It's a part of our cultural or tourist kind of offer that we have. And this is a game that's going to be played by hundreds of millions of people around the planet, who's going to be looking at this glagolica, who's going to be using this glagolica. And from my perspective, this is a huge untapped potential, apparently, not just for fun and game, but for education and knowledge. So do you think that, can you tell me a little bit about the experience that that gaming kind of educated you? I mean, besides the fact, like, English language, I think that the reason we're kind of good in English is not even Cartoon Network. I think that was the later generation. We're kind of half there, but I think games, like learning foreign languages, understanding different things.
Yeah, I would definitely point to something like World of Warcraft, where you would jump in and you would have to kind of talk to people, and you would be in this guild going on raids and quests together or whatever, and it was made up of a huge international community, so you had no choice. You had to speak to people, and just by doing it for an extended period of time, and the game was very addictive, you basically learned the language.
Yeah,
we never had localization of any like games or cartoons or movies back in the day, so it was a given that we would learn the English language.
Yeah, probably only Tetris, probably.
Yeah, maybe.
No, but makes sense. So it's good. So the game you're making is in English.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Is it? Can you talk a little bit about, before we continue, like the games you're making?
We're making two games. One of them is called Light and Dark. It's a 2D platformer, which basically revolves around using light as kind of your primary weapon and exploring a haunted, spooky mansion to try and figure out where things are, where platforms are, where enemies are. And all of the enemies in the games are like really gross bugs and maggots and flies and stuff like that. So
you're teaching children to hate animals.
Yeah. It's about phobias, basically. Yeah. So and then we've gotten funding for that game, partly because we were involved in a lot of the conferences that were going on here, and so we weren't really expecting that to happen. We were just we wanted to try and make a game. And I was at a point where, because I have another company that does web development, I had enough money that I could fund the whole thing for a short period of time. We got to a point where we created a prototype that was good enough to show to potential investors, and they said, "This is great, let's give you money." And I think one of the reasons why it's great for them is because coming from the UK, we're like Croatia is a much cheaper labor force. So for the same money that they spend there, here they can kind of get more bang for their buck, I suppose. You know, whereas there they maybe they can fund 6 months of development. Here they can fund year or 2 years or whatever. So,
is that
it makes,
one of the reasons why there's a huge rise in Eastern Europe when it comes to game developing as well?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, definitely. I think we still are waiting to see some of the really big companies try and make a push here. I can't speculate as to why they haven't already, but I'm seeing like from year to year going to these conferences, I'm seeing more and more publishers and more investors coming in and trying to fund projects. I think the challenge there is the education system is not yet on the same level that it needs to be to create the jobs that we need to finish.
Give me an example. People who are working with you, you know,
Yeah.
what type of education do they have? Where does it come from?
Oh, so it's all over the place, basically. Okay. Yeah, because like I said, there's no specific place that you can go to. I mean, there are courses you can take. So, for example, Machina is a game dev school which has a lot of courses on these specific topics. But for example, in our team, like we have our game designers finished architecture. Okay. So yeah, he's an architect and
digital architect.
Yeah, and I mean, people are from all over, from graphics schools and from. I think FAIR is probably the best one you can do in terms of programming, and getting programmers is probably easier. But there are like specific jobs that are very hard to find people for, like. You need someone like a technical artist, for example. So that's someone that needs to have kind of an artistic education, but he also needs to have some sort of programming knowledge to kind of create particle effects or just like, you know, there's a bit of an overlap between two schools of knowledge that you need to have, and that's very rare to find. Yeah.
What about the script writers and creative people?
I think for that it can be a little bit easier because again we have a lot of writers, and I know a couple of writers that are working in film and you know just like standard TV industry and whatever. But yeah, level design is a challenge. Game design is a challenge. Like, how do you start a school for game design? It's a very unique topic, and it requires a bit of specialization. And it's one of those things that can make or break your game. So, yeah, I think when you kind of narrow it down, you have a couple of these really unique things that are very hard to get because of the way the education system is structured.
Okay, so you think that but you think kids, younger generation want to do this?
Yeah, and I think the way they're doing it now is, and that's a plus, is that you do have a lot of resources online. So you can sit down, you can open YouTube, and you can learn a lot of these things. But if you had a formal education process for a lot of these things, then that would really help. And I have to say it's really been changing a lot in the last couple of months, particularly. So just last week I was at I don't know the English word for it. It's Academy of Dramaturgy. Art. So basically, so they had a program where they contacted a bunch of colleges. So it was fair and design, and I think it was some art school. Anyway, a bunch of them got together and basically said, look, let's try and form teams to create, to pitch video game projects. And so they came up with like 4 teams of students that were all from different colleges, and they sat them together and gave them 3 weeks to come up with a game prototype. And to me, that was just like, wow. Like, if someone told me that I could have done that like 5-10 years ago, that was amazing. And it's one of the things where I think it's really important to recognize that it's a multidisciplinary practice, that you need to have people with very different specializations to be able to create a product like this.
So any good ideas?
Yeah, there was, I mean, obviously, like, there's, the biggest problem I see is the scope. I think people aren't aware of kind of what your production budget needs to be, like how long it's going to take you to actually create something. So they tend to just throw things at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah.
But yeah, like if you were to kind of boil that down, trim the fat, you would get. I mean, the concepts that I saw were really cool. Like a couple of them, I would pay money tomorrow to buy them if they were made. So again, it's kind of. For one of those first thing that's just starting off, I think it's a Great idea. Yeah.
No, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think specifically when younger people, they're raised around video games today.
Yeah, yeah.
They're playing it since they're kids, and I know a lot of parents who say, I'm happier that my kid is playing a game that he's watching a TV or that he's watching a cartoon.
Yeah.
Because I mean, some of the games are kind of educational games today. I mean, a lot of the games when we were kids, a lot of the toys are now basically in digital format. So like, I don't know, Hit the Crocodile, or what was the name of those games, or Find the Ducky, or
Hungry
Hippos, right? It's all now kind
I
of
think
digital.
the biggest example is Minecraft. It's basically Legos.
It's Legos online.
It's Legos online, yeah.
And kids are loving it. In
Yeah,
Croatia, there's not a lot of YouTube stars, but the biggest ones are kind of game reviewers for younger generations, specifically Minecraft.
I think the problem with just YouTubers or any kind of like online thing in Croatia is, like you said earlier, it's the audience is very small, so you have to make the difficult decision. Okay, do you want to talk in English and then potentially reach a huge audience? But the downside there is you have a lot more competition. Or do you want to talk in Croatian and then you kind of have a really small pool of potential viewers, but the market is kind of up for grabs.
Yeah, makes sense.
It's a very, very hard choice to make, and that's why I wouldn't make a great game for Croatian people as well. It's because it's very hard to get your money.
But as I said earlier,
I think that the best thing to do would be to make something that has our culture and has our ideas and stories, but has the potential to reach a wide audience.
Yeah, but I mean, it's hard to imagine what game would be a specifically Croatian game for only Croatian audience to play. It would be like, I don't know, guess who's this corrupt politician?
Yeah.
But we had Sraz. Sraz was basically a quiz kind of.
Yeah.
But it was Croatian. It was questions that I guess some of them were about Croatia, but it was a trivia quiz type of game. Yeah, right. But no, the idea is this, because I'm interested, because it seems to me like this growing industry, the only thing that it lacks is for people to understand the potential that it has.
Yeah.
And specifically when it comes to Croatian, either investments, government, even the audience. Like for me, it's surprising that we were talking about this a couple of days earlier, how there is not a list of Croatian video games. It's something, and even for every movie that you make, if you're making any form of movie that is going to be shown on television or is going to be produced by the government or going to be subsidized by the government, it goes to the archives. People remember it. It has to be, remembered. March 2015, this and this movie was made. But when it comes to video games, people don't care. But you think if we start creating this type of being proud, let's say, or having this idea that it's this new culture that in 100 years people will be going to the museums or reading in their history books, and then Serious Sam was played around the world. Do you think there's a lack of understanding that this is the future branding of Croatia in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that needs to happen is you need to have a generational shift. Basically, like the people that grew up playing video games need to grow up enough so that they can, help influence the overall climate, be part of the system, exactly, to kind of make that shift. I think it's happening. I think it's coming. I know that there's a bunch of
ministers playing games.
Well, let's hope so.
Maybe the president, she's spending her time playing games. You never know. We can only wish. Yeah, no, that, and I'm also interested because this is the thing. I remember when I was a kid that playing games I really loved RPGs, and in RPGs the game would kind of promote that you act good in a way.
Yeah.
It's such a weird thing because it took years and years for industry to say, now revolutionary new RPG, you don't have to be good and you can finish a game. And for me as a kid, I remember it was such a nice place. Today we talk a lot about games, and it was always talked about a lot about when it comes to game violence and how children will play games and go on the street and then shoot other people. And obviously that didn't happen. The whole generation didn't become serial killers or mass shooters, right? I mean, there are examples, I guess, examples of how maybe some people got very aggressive because they played games, but for majority of people it wasn't something aggressive. And I was thinking, but people forget the good stuff. So can we talk a little bit about gamification? Because so the game that you're making right now, this black and white, I guess it's it's gonna teach you how to use
It's
visuals as well. It's
yeah,
not
yeah,
pure.
yeah. It's about obviously it's about perception and reflexes, and it's also about the genre that we're making is it's called a roguelike, and I won't get too much into the particulars about it, but basically it boils down to, in order to finish the game, you have to complete it perfectly, so there's no lives, so if you die halfway through, the whole thing resets and you have to start all over again.
Well, that's
and
horrible.
so
Harsh,
yeah,
man, harsh.
so it's a hard game where basically it's not about memorizing where things are and just by random repetition finishing it. It's more about getting really good at the mechanics so that you can execute it perfectly from start to finish to complete the game. I mean, in terms of gamification, it's one of those things which I don't know. I haven't really studied it so much. It's one of those things that kind of happens on its own. It kind of seeps into products that we use and so on to help you be a little bit more productive. So yeah, I don't know. I can't really speak much about gamification. I think it's one of those things that you're going to see more in big companies as a way to kind of optimize their workflow or whatever, to kind of make meaningless jobs more fun.
Makes sense.
For us, in our particular case, it's like we love the job that we're doing. It's pretty fun for us as it is. It is very challenging, so perhaps we don't need the extra push.
No, it makes sense. But I was thinking more in the case of promoting it to let's say educational schools.
Oh, okay.
My idea was so you're making a game now that is kind of not connected with something, let's say, that a government would
It's definitely
feel educational.
But from
when
an
it comes to
educational
Croatian,
perspective, there's obviously a huge benefit because like kids are not watching as many movies as they're playing video games. So if you make a video game for them, regardless of what it is, if it's about something that you want to convey, be it history or geography or whatever, you have a better chance of actually having them retain some information out of there. Out of that stuff.
Two examples that I have to offer for this is, first one would be Kerbal Space Program. That obviously made a whole lot of people fall in love with. I don't know how to call it. It's astrophysics meets engineering. It's basics, but it's so realistic in a sense that it really teaches you, I think, basic knowledge, how to understand astrophysics. And it's so funny because it takes you a couple of weeks of playing it to then watch a real rocket flying, and you kind of realizing, oh, this is what they're doing. This is their stage 1. Oh, this is the stage 2. And my second example is I've been playing Mountain Blade, and there's a lot of mods, different modes, and one of the modes that I've downloaded for free, was the one the Balkans in the 19th century. So right now I think I'm charging with Bogdanić with Alkars. I don't know, I'm wiping out some poor Slavonian peasants who didn't pay enough taxes. Doesn't matter. But the point is, this is amazing. Like, if you would tell to somebody in Croatia that I'm playing this game, they would be like, what? Where is this game? I would like to play this game. I would love to play this game. But it seems to me like there's a huge, there's a vacuum. There's a vacuum between understanding that kids love playing video games, and not just kids. And then there's this huge fear like, we are losing our culture, we are losing what we are, and people don't seem to understand that they can connect those two things.
Yeah, well, it's very, I think it's kind of, the solution is fairly straightforward. The professor in the class needs to, actually play games.
Yeah, and give games.
And give games to kids. And again, the classroom needs to be equipped with computers so the kids can actually play those games. And as soon as you have that, as soon as you have the shift where the professor actually wants to sit down and wants to play the game and wants to show it to kids, then that's going to happen. But yeah, I think it's a generational thing mostly.
So yeah,
I think kind
example.
of U.S. kids probably grew up with video games much faster than we did, and like the people that are in power, the people that are running the schools or whatever, they're all gamers probably. Whereas in our case, that's probably still not happened.
Probably using it.
Maybe in another 10, 15 years or whatever.
No, because gamification as well. I think reading articles and watching kind of videos about it, I think part of the gamification can also be that if you use games in schools, that you can kind of get grades from that as well. So if you have specific games and you use the method of that game in school, for example, I don't know, there was been you were talking about bugs, but let's say that there's a game that teaches you about biology, right? So, it can also be used like an extra credit, let's say.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're good at that game, if you understand that game, and the game is all about education, I guess. I mean, what's the difference between playing that game and going in front of the blackboard and explaining,
Yeah, I would actually say the game is better because you're probably going to have fun doing it and you have a higher chance of actually retaining whatever information the game has.
Yeah, and
versus standing in front of a blackboard and writing.
And emotional responses as well.
Yeah,
I mean, you're going to care. And if specifically if it's a cooperative game, right? So I heard a lot of stories how actually people are, you mentioned in World of Warcraft as well, people, and I've heard that the stories about siblings. Siblings don't liking each other or constantly fighting, but then you give them games to play cooperatively, and all of a sudden they start cooperating.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good example of how it works so obviously on on kids when they're brothers and sisters. Of course, it's going to help, in school, I guess, to be friendly with your colleagues, to understand you need to rely on them, or vice versa. But what kind of a future do you think we're in store when it comes to Croatian developing? Because apparently they started kind of with little subventions, but
I don't know, to be honest. I think there's definitely going to be a push for more investment. I think it's bound to happen. I think we're going to stumble a bit because in order to get a studio which is kind of self-sustainable and can pay the bills and everything, you need to have a hit game, and to have a hit game today in today's crowded market is really hard. So what I spoke about earlier about the barriers of entry being lowered, that's a positive thing in a way where you can release easily, but it's also harder because there's more games on the platform. And so you really have to think about standing out a lot more than you had to think about it for like 5-10 years ago. So I think the problem that's going to happen is...
But nobody's knows it was going to be a hit, right?
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like kind of the odds are stacked against you. You kind of have to really be good with marketing. Your game design has to be on point. Your mechanics have to be on point. The art has to be good. So everything has to be kind of on a much higher level if you want a chance at success. And so I think what could potentially happen here is we could get a couple of investments in random companies here and there, but the quality of those games is whoever is going to decide where the money goes needs to be very careful, because like if you and I sat together and wrote, a 5-page document about some really shitty game and then we just went and pitched it and maybe we got money, what are the chances of it actually becoming a good game? You have to kind of do your homework.
Daikatana.
Yeah.
Well, you never know, but my idea, so what is a successful Croatian game is, let's say, Serious Sam. So who would expect that, is it time traveling back to the future dystopian Egypt or to the ancient dystopian Egypt and killing everything, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, back in the days when the first-person shooters were all the rage, right?
Yeah. I mean, they announced the new Serious Sam game. We'll see how that one does. They're still working on it, and they've had a bunch of successes with the Talos Principle and so on.
Yeah, that's interesting because that was like a logical puzzle game.
Yeah, philosophic game as well. But yeah, I mean, in terms of how...
That's how people grow old very fast in Croatia.
But what I was going to say is that kind of... they have 25 years of experience, right? And they have a reputation behind them. So for them, that part is a lot easier than it is on new teams. So they don't need to ask for government funding or whatever. So the danger is that if you're a new studio just starting out, you don't have a lot of experience. There's quite a few obstacles you need to overcome in order to release something that's really well made and that can actually bring the money back. And so that's where I think the biggest risk is. And it's the same with us. Like, we've gotten funding and we're working on 2 projects and everything is going great and we're all pretty excited about it. But like, let's say the game goes out and it doesn't do well for whatever reason. Maybe it's bad timing or whatever. Or maybe there's a competing product in the market. Maybe we release with a ton of bugs. Like, there's multiple ways to mess things up. So basically... I think you have a lot of obstacles that you need to overcome, and if you're investing money in something like that, you need to do your homework. Like, you need to kind of be aware of all of the problems that might creep up, and that's where it really depends on if the government starts to finance these things, who's going to be sitting down on whatever board and deciding what project gets funded or not. And does he have the
makes sense.
necessary experience to say,
So again,
this
the
is
man.
good, this isn't good, you know?
Can we make a game about that? A game about government investing into video games.
Yeah, yeah.
That'd be a really great game. But okay, on the end, can you give a little bit of advice for somebody who would be interested in game developing?
I would say, well, the way I see it, you can go in two directions. Like, you can try and do something on your own. Like, you can sit down and try and create your own game. Good luck with that. It's very hard, and you need to be kind of need to have special. Yeah, you need to have a lot of knowledge about a lot of things. But let's say that you're in your early 20s and you have 5 years to spare, and you just want to have fun. Sure, it's possible. Like, you could sit down if you're dedicated enough. You can work on it. But the other thing I see is you can try and find a job in the industry, so you can try and specialize in something, be it programming, art, design, whatever, and try and get a job at some of the studios. Or let's say perhaps you want to try and start your own studio. In that sense, you would need to have more people. You need to have, like, let's say 5 or 6 people minimum to try and start something. In every case, you kind of need, I think you need to keep your ambitions in check. So try and finish a project, because finishing a project will, maybe it's a small project, maybe it's super simple, maybe you do it in 1 year, but it's gonna give you a good overview of what the whole process is about, and like all of the steps that you need to take to finish something. That's much more important than sitting down and saying, I'm gonna make this huge big thing and spend 5 years on working on it, but never release it because of whatever reason, like the scope becomes too big and you can't handle the work or whatever, you get a job somewhere. So to anyone starting out, I would say just keep whatever it is you want to do, keep it small. Like, try and reduce it down to the bare minimum just to release something, get it out there, because that you're going to learn so much from the process. And let's say that a couple of years down the line you talk to somebody, you have a new project or whatever, you can tell them, look, I already have something that I finished a couple of years back, you can play it, you can see that I know what it takes to finish a project. So I think that's very, very important.
That's cool. And when it comes to education, if somebody needs to kind of learn new skills that are going to help them develop, where can you go?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you want to do. Obviously, having a college education is always a plus. I'm not going to say that it's all nonsense and not worth it. It really depends on what you need to do. But in cases where you're looking to specialize in something, your best bet is to either go to Machina, which is a game dev course.
That's if you're in Zagreb.
Yeah, if you're in Zagreb. They have one in Rijeka as well, I think.
Okay,
I'm not sure in what stages it is. But other than that, you can learn so much from just YouTube videos and tutorials. There's so much stuff online now that it's fairly easy to get going. And the game engines like Unity and Unreal, they have a lot of resources as well, so their documentation is very thorough, so you can get a really good head start with all of that stuff. So yeah, I think the resources are there, and obviously, like, if you have like very specific problems, you can always reach out to the local community. Like, there are game dev meetups in Zagreb happening every month, and there's big conferences like Reboot Info Gamer and Reboot Develop, which happen. So both happen once a year. One is in Zagreb, the other is in Dubrovnik. Which the Zagreb one I encourage everyone to attend, because there's always a huge amount of indie studios there showcasing something, and it's a good kind of way to try and push yourself into the industry.
Last year. It was pretty cool. So many different games.
Yeah, and if you have something that's kind of more concrete, if you have a really solid playable, and if you're looking for funding, just go to Reboot Develop. The ticket is a bit higher priced, but they do offer discounts for students. So, you know, you can go there, and there's so many lectures going on there. A bunch of them are on YouTube as well, so you can look that up. But the main reason is that you can get access to publishers and investors if you have a really solid project. So
it's amazing, and on the end, it's a rising industry in Croatia as well.
Yeah,
and it's
definitely.
It's a well-paid industry, if I understand correctly.
Yeah,
higher than average, kind of.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
So it's definitely worth investing. Specifically, we always say that all the young, educated people are leaving the country, but gaming the industry is a little bit different.
Yeah, I think. I don't know, I don't see a lot of game developers leaving, honestly. I think it's a really, really great community that I just kind of stumbled into on accident, and now I'm loving every meetup and every conference and everywhere I go to. I just love hanging out with those people.
Can people just harass you or pitch you their ideas on your mail? Like constantly. Hey, Dol, I got this great idea.
I would say
It's
that
about a pigeon
I would say that
making
ideas are cheap. It's all about execution.
Okay.
You and me, we can sit down here for 30 minutes and we can come up with 50 ideas about some really great games and whatever. And one of the things that you learn when you're working in the industry is your idea has to stand up to scrutiny. And that's something that we do on a daily basis. I come up with a dozen ideas to my game designer and he shuts them all down because they're shit. So, you know, it's just part of the process. You have to iterate a lot. So whatever idea you have to test it. You have to test it early. You can't afford to spend 2 or 3 months working on it, actually implementing it, without asking a bunch of questions of whether or not it's a smart choice or not. So, so if people have game ideas, that's great.
Yeah, but that's
perfect.
nothing.
But that's nothing.
I
would suggest that if you have game ideas that you really think are great and you really you've analyzed it a lot, you've spent more time, you've talked to your friends about it and they all say it's great, none of them tell you that it sucks, then write a game design document. Just put it all on paper, go into the details. The details are what matters. Just try and write down all of the mechanics, try and find loopholes, ways that people could exploit your ideas where everything could break down. Because like your game as a whole, everything needs to be tightly knit, everything needs to make sense, and every single feature you have needs to reinforce some other feature. You know, it has to flow together into one cohesive product.
Yeah, the idea is not enough.
So yeah, like I said, you know, we can sit down and we can come up with stupid ideas all day. And some of them could be great.
My job.
But yeah.
No, okay. So thank you so much, though, for this conversation.
Thank you.
And I mean, my personal vision is that one day, you know, just like sports, and we have esports, and I guess it's gonna be, you know, a big, I guess, a huge, big thing that people are gonna be loving it, just like they're loving football. I guess kids will be playing it on the tournaments. We will have World Cups and European Cups, and then one day, people will go to the museum and they'll probably look at your games and be like, oh my God, look at how games looked 100 years ago. Right, so before we go, and you guys, you check the type of games that Dovla is doing. It's not out, right?
No, it's not out. You can check our website. It's zerolife.studio. So we have 2 games that we're working on. One is Light and Dark that I talked about earlier. The other is The Hatching. It's a game about a crocodile that roams the English countryside and murders people and dismembers them.
Typical
stuff. Yeah.
Typical stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, you can check them out. We were at Reboot Info Gamer, and we will be there again this year. It's in November, so you can come check us out there. We're surely gonna have demos up. So,
okay. But before we go, just one more thing. What was the type of Croatian game you can recommend? I don't want to put you in a spot, so you're gonna push a specific Croatian game. But I think there's a lot of people probably who never played a Croatian game in a sense of, or maybe they did, but they didn't know that they were playing a Croatian game. Is there like a hidden gem or something maybe that you would recommend people trying? I mean, I would recommend Straz, but Straz is an old trivia quiz.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on kind of what you like. I think that's the biggest one. I tend to like a lot of 2D platformers. That's kind of my thing. And there's not a lot of 2D platformers in Croatia that I can think of. Oof, that's a difficult choice. I don't know. I mean, there's a bunch of new games coming out all the time. So
you didn't play all of them, so you wouldn't know. But
yeah. I mean, there's one game that came out 2 days ago. It's called I Hate Running Backwards. It's made by Binks. It's a Croatian studio that kind of is working together with Crow Team. And
what's the game about?
It's a simple run and kind of shoot 'em up game. It's co-op as well, so you just kind of run backwards and shoot at a bunch of enemies. That's fairly straightforward. There was another game that was released quite recently by another studio called Exordium, which is called Last Encounter, which is a space shooter as well. It also has some randomly generated weapons and stuff. That's also pretty good. I think
typical Croatian story.
Last 6 months, I think the game that I would probably recommend the most, that I think is very unique, is called Inked. And it's a puzzle game, and the whole game is done in kind of 2 colors, and it's kind of drawn with a pen, you know, and it's isometric view, and it's basically a puzzle game, and yeah,
it's a Croatian game.
It's a Croatian game, yeah.
Who was the studio?
Somnium Games. So I think they're they're an example of a studio which also got outside funding to help with their game, and I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure they also got it at some of the conferences like Reboot, Infogamer, and Develop. So again, it's a good...
so there's different genres? Different genres. So.
I mean, you have games like Unity of Command, which is it's made by an old industry veteran, and it's a war game basically. It's a super tactical game where like you're controlling tanks and units, and it's like a military simulation on a hex grid, for example. And I would say that it's probably not as well known, but it has like a very dedicated niche following, and he's now working on the sequel. And he's actually the guy who made Winamp. Well, he didn't make the player, but I think he made one of the codecs that was used or something of the sort.
Oh, okay, that's amazing.
Just Google that stuff. I'm not 100% sure on what the deal is, but he's making games, and Unity of Command is one of those where it's like very niche, but very, very good, and has a very dedicated fan base. I'd probably come up with more ideas as soon as we end, but that's one of the reasons why we should probably have a list somewhere.
Yeah, we should. I mean, my idea is to have more and more podcasts and talks with the rest of the guys as well at one point, because I think
I can definitely hook you up.
Yeah, but people don't know about this. Even you who's in the industry can't remember all, because it's not because there's so many of them, because we're not talking about them that much. But why isn't there like an Alka game? Come on, it should be a simple mobile phone game. It's not really that hard. You just have, you're writing that Alka, you're trying to hit that Alka. It's unbelievable. I think it should be definitely completely paid by the office of the president. That Alka and Kamena Sramena. Come on, it's good old traditional games. We just put them in a digital shape. Kurva kuna, that would be amazing. Come on, we'll play Kurva kuna. I don't even know. There's, you see, as you said, 50 great ideas we can come up with. And they're not gonna be made. So. Thank you very much for watching this podcast, and check out what Dovla is doing.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next week.
Thank
you. Bye.
Bye.